Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session on Director ID numbers and the future of CAS Desktop. Before we get into the session, which will start in a couple of moments, can you just please let me know that you can actually hear us and that we're coming through loud and clear, both Warren and I. So Warren, if you could just say a few words, and if you could just type in the chat and the QA that you can hear us, that would be amazing.
Thank you, Daniel, and hopefully everyone can hear me loud and clear. If you don't know what to type in the chat, maybe let us know where you are joining us from around the country today. Yep, getting some good sound checks in the chat. And Daniel, you're not joining us from Sicily, maybe only in your mind.
I'm just making sure you're paying attention.
Making sure I'm reading it. We've got some people from Melbourne and Newcastle, which is good to hear.
Amazing. Okay, we'll make a start in a minute or two. So if you just hold for a moment, that would be great. Welcome, yes, to everyone we've got people from everywhere, Warren. Tassie, New South Wales, WA.
From Goulburn,
Newcastle.
Fantastic.
Amazing. Okay.
And if people joining us from Melbourne today, enjoying a beautiful Melbourne day, 30 degrees outside, Daniel, 31 now.
Very nice outside. Too hot for me, Warren. Too hot for me to be outside. But it's beautiful. It's nice to have some good news, isn't it?
It is, it is.
Well, look, we'll make a start. We've got a good number of people in the session. Yes, 23 in Tassie is a lot more comfortable. Thanks, Pamela. I think it'd be nicer to be there than here at the moment. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone to today's session on Director ID numbers and the future of CAS Desktop. I'm joined by Warren Rendon today, or I'm joining Warren Rendon. We go hand in hand. Warren is the head of CAS 360. At the moment, he oversees the rollout for Australia, Singapore and New Zealand, and next year we'll be going into the UK. Warren has been with us for a good number of 15, 16 years, and we've seen Warren come up through the business and has done excellent work in the CAS area, both in desktop and 360. And for those of you who don't know, Warren sits on the board, which is pretty much a steering committee around the whole Director ID process. And Warren has been very influential in some of the outcomes and really good things that have come of it, from what it was originally intended to be to now what it is. Warren has been very influential in that. So one of the really good things, and I'm grateful that Warren has this opportunity, is that he represents you, being the client, every single time that he speaks to the steering committee, and really makes really strong and powerful recommendation to ensure that we get really good outcomes. So today we're here to talk about the Director ID numbers, and we're going to go through that in quite a bit of detail. We're also going to talk about the future of CAS Desktop, and we'll make very clear about what we're doing with CAS Desktop, where it's headed, and then also what the future is going to look like, because at some point it will come to an end of life. We have no plans to announce any of that, but at some point it's inevitable. And I'm sure that all of you have noticed and seen that it is a step which is just going to be a natural progression, but it's not going to be something that we rush you into. It's not going to be a date that we announce as of today. There's plenty of time for you to move across. There's plenty of time for you to consider moving across. And one of the things that I can say is that we are moving across a great number of people headed up by our account management team. And we are more than happy to not only help you with the transition, but to also support you through the entire process to make sure that you get along well and you get through it strong, and that you're going to be able to reap the amazing benefits of moving to CAS 360. So Warren, we'll just want to just say welcome and thanks for joining us today. We're on another webinar, and probably not the ideal way to be doing it. We'd rather be in person, but we work with what we've got. So welcome, Warren.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for the very kind introduction, mate. I do my best to get a good outcome for agents, and sometimes the ATO are obliging and sometimes not so much. But anyway, we'll keep going. Just so that everyone knows, and before we get the question of whether the slides and the recording of this webinar will be provided, they will be. We are recording, we've got the slides, and they'll be sent out to you after this. If you do have any questions, please type them into the Q&A. We'll be monitoring them. We've got some stars from the CAS 360 team, Jeremy and Andy, and Damien on the Q&A as well. If you've got any question, please feel free to put it in there, and we'll do our best to answer it. Okay, in terms of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to go into a bit about the MBR program and then Director ID, and focus on, I suppose, some of the key questions that everyone needs to know. If you did attend our massive 3,500 people Director ID webinar, there will be a little bit of overlap, but there's also some new stuff in CAS 360 that wasn't released for that particular, in time for that particular webinar. And obviously we've got the CAS Desktop update that we'll give at the end as well. So I'll make a bit of a start on what the MBR program is. Now, some of you might have been aware, and if you've been using CAS Desktop for a while, you might have come along to some of our update sessions where we've mentioned, I suppose, this registry transformation or this registry rework coming for maybe for 5 or 6 years now. So what the MBR is, it's a Modernising Business Registers program, and it's a complete government program to change the way that the ASIC registers work, but also all of the registers, not just the company register, which everyone sort of knows ASIC for, but all of the registers that ASIC keeps. So maybe your SMSF auditor register and things like that, as well, is all being modernized. So phase one of this, and I've put this as the first dot point here, is the creation of a whole new body to look after the company register and essentially these business registers, and that is the ABRS, so the Australian Business Registry Service. So while today you're still seeing the ASIC branding, they are very much have moved over to the ABRS, a lot of those functions. So the ABRS is effectively managing the ASIC registry business now. Okay, so it's a little bit of a transition phase, but you will start to see the ABRS logo a lot more, and the ABRS branding come out a lot more. So that's one of the big parts of this program, is moving away from ASIC and into a new system or a new governing body called the ABRS. Now, the ABRS sits underneath or as part of the ATO. So it is effectively the ATO taking over responsibility of those ASIC registers, and ASIC no longer looking after them. Point two is another really important point, and that is rewriting of the company legislation to include more modern features and to include a little bit more flexibility where required and a little bit more specification where required as well. But effectively, there's a rewriting of that company legislation to allow a whole heap of changes as part of the ABRS, but also to allow the ABRS to function in, I suppose, a less rigid way than what ASIC are forced to function because of the way the Corporations Act is written. So there's a big new body and a whole heap of legislation changes. So what does that cost? It costs us money. It costs us about $400 million to be exact. So a huge investment by the government, 400 million plus, to go with this new body, this rewriting of the company legislation, and a whole new technology piece that sits underneath as well. So, so there's some big changes as part of this MBR program, and this has a 5-year rollout. So what we're really seeing is effectively year one, or we're in the first 18 months of that, and that's where Director ID comes in. In 2023, we will see the new company register come in, and then 24 and 25, we'll see a few more of the smaller registers come across as well. So it really is a big 5-year project.
Warren,
I've got a question. Yeah.
So Warren, just a quick thing, and I think it's really important for clients to understand that this is in fact going ahead. This is not something that's just being talked about. This is being worked on, and it will go ahead. And it's going to look a little bit different to what you're used to dealing with at the moment.
Yeah, so this project, the MBR project, was something that BGL were consulting on all the way back in 2017 and 2018. Seems like a long time ago pre-pandemic, but we were really involved in sort of setting up a lot of the I suppose, aggressive goals and the outcomes that we wanted as part of a reprogramming. So it's been a long journey for us as well. I've got a question mark there as why. Why are we doing this? Some of you may not know, but the ASIC registry system, the business is, or the actual technology piece is over 30 years old. So if you could imagine the old computer you were using 30 years ago, that's what's running your ASIC registry system today. So it is rather old. It's very costly. And they were kind of backed into a corner in that no one actually knows understands the technology it's used to maintain it. So we got to a situation where it was no longer even maintainable in its current form. So a whole new project needed to be built in. Obviously, ASIC have gone through a number of, I suppose, different identities about who they are. And I think I'm not speaking out of turn by saying that they came to the decision that the registry was not their core business, but it was quickly becoming too big of a business for them to maintain. So moving it over to the ATO, which is, I suppose, a little bit more experienced in technology businesses and technology builds, given their experience. So moving it over, and obviously the rewriting of the legislation is a big part of this as well, modernizing the legislation, making it a little bit more flexible so that modern things like digital signing can be actually legislated for the first time as well.
Yeah, and Warren, a big part of this program really is the whole Director ID thing, which there's been lots of discussion about this, even quite a bit of confusion about it, but hopefully today we can provide a little bit of clarity around that. And then also how we can help you to ensure that you can get your clients through this in the most effective way possible through strong communication and correspondence. So Warren, what is Director ID?
Yeah, so Director ID is really the first project of the MBR. And I'll talk a little bit about what it is there to do. It is the Director ID by its name. It's a unique identifier for company directors. Now, as part of this, I've probably got the points out of order here, but as part of this, this number will be a public number. So a lot of questions I've received, a lot of emails over the last month of why didn't they being the ATO, just use the tax file number? The big differentiation between the Director ID and the tax file number is that the Director ID will be public. It will be public in 2023. It's private now as a transitional measure until 2023, but in 2023, the Director ID becomes public. What we expect to see in 2023 is when you do a company search, you will receive Warren Rendon, and then you'll receive my Director ID number. You might receive the suburb that I live in. You might receive the state that I live in. You might receive the year that I was born. The Director ID, however, will be the main identifier that you will receive. You will no longer be able to search the residential address of a company director. So there's a number of reasons as to why, but certainly a privacy reason is a big one. The Director ID, that number will become front and center, and your, I suppose, private information, while still will be required to be lodged to the regulator, it won't be effectively available for sale like your place of residence is today. So all company directors must apply. There is no exemptions. If you are a director of an Australian company, you must get a Director ID, and there are some severe penalties, which we will get into a little bit later.
But the good thing is, Warren, there's plenty of time, unless you are a newly appointed director that hasn't been appointed in the past, obviously.
Yeah, so that we'll get onto the deadlines. That's the next slide. So directors, another point here is that the directors must apply for the Director ID themselves. Much against my lobbying, Daniel, was to be able to allow the agents to do it for the directors, but the ID process itself is an ID certification, right? So it's not as if someone can do it for you. It is a process where you need to identify yourself to effectively the ATO through MyGovID. So there is a whole sort of identification process that every company director must go through. Now, it is done through MyGovID. It can be done digitally, and certainly the preference from the ABRS is to do it digitally. There are alternative methods. There is a phone method and also a paper method. There is also obviously a method for foreign company directors, because foreign directors are not exempt. If you are a director of an Australian company, even if you live in another country, you must get a director ID. So there's a whole heap of different exemptions there, but processes there, but you must get an ID. And I've got here why. I've talked a little bit about the privacy. The other one is around phoenixing. So phoenixing has been an issue in the past in Australia, where effectively one company rises from the ashes of another and essentially allows that company to avoid its debts. The other one is identity of company directors. Believe it or not, there are over 50 Homer Simpsons in the Australian company director database. I'm sure there's just as many Donald Ducks and Mickey Mouses. Right now today, to become a director of an Australian company, you just need a name. Any name will do, because they don't verify it at all. So this director ID process will hopefully stop that from happening and only have actual living people as company directors. So there's a number of reasons as to why this has been implemented. Director ID will also play a part in the bigger picture, which is the whole new company register. So the director ID will effectively force every director to have identified themselves. So with every director that's identified themselves, when they move to the new company register, they are moving across identified people as opposed to Homer Simpson, Donald Duck, and Mickey Mouse. I hope that helps explain a part of why Director ID has taken place. So next I'll go through when a person needs to apply for a Director ID. So as I mentioned, every company director must apply. However, depending on when you were appointed a director, you might have different deadlines. So if you were appointed as a director before the 31st of October 2021, a director of any company by the 31st of October 2021, you have until the 30th of November 2022. So you have a big transitional measure there. So if you were a director before the 31st of October 2021, you have until the 30th of November 2022. If you were appointed after October 31st, so in between the 1st of November 2021 and the 4th of April 2022, then you only have 28 days from your appointment date to get a director ID. So it is quite a tight time frame for anyone that has been appointed as a director after or on November 1st. And then it becomes a requirement that must happen before appointment. So if you are appointing a director after the 5th of April, they must have their director ID. The only exception is if they were a director on the 31st of October. So just to confuse you a little bit more, if I was a director on the 1st of January this year, I have until the 30th of November 2022, regardless of how many companies I join in the meantime. Okay, so if you are an existing director on or before the 31st of October, it doesn't matter how many companies you are added to, because you are already granted that existing director clause. I hope I've made that clear to everyone. If not, please ask some questions in the chat. And then I'll move on to the next point, which is your director ID penalties. Now, these are quite severe, and they are maximum penalties. So I'm not going to say that this is what the enforced amounts will be, but these are the maximum penalties. And this was a screenshot taken from the ASIC website. It's not one that I've made up myself. I will say that the specific penalties have not yet been provided by the ABRS. It is something that they will provide around April. I will be very clear and say that it is expected that enforcement does not take place until April. So there is a bit of leeway there around, especially around those that require the 28-day rule for becoming a director for the first time. But essentially from April onwards, the penalties will be in place. So for failure to have a director ID when required to do so, the maximum penalty is $13,200 for criminal and $1.1 million for civil. Failure to apply for a director ID when directed by the register So this is essentially a follow-up from the register, are the same amounts. Applying for multiple director IDs is a big no-no. You've got a fine there of 26,640 or 1 year imprisonment, which is very, very severe. And then misrepresenting a director ID as well is a maximum fine of 26,640 and 1 year imprisonment. So they have really put some strong and severe maximum penalties for director ID offences. As I've said, these are the maximum penalties. We don't have clarification on, I guess, the more minor end at this stage. Daniel, anything you wanted to add?
Look, and the thing is that as you're saying, Warren, and look, there will be a little bit of leeway here from what we understand so that people can get used to the process and stuff like that. But then once you have the director ID, just note that any newly formed companies, you don't have to go and get a new one for them. The director ID then will stay with them for life.
Correct. And just with the penalties, I'll be really clear that the penalties are for the individual. The penalties are not fines for the company. The penalties are not fines for the agent. They are fines for the individual. So they won't appear, for example, in your company debt reports.
Actually, what would be an interesting question, Warren, is just in the Q&A or in the chat, if people could just share if any of them have gone through the process and what it's been like while you go on to a little bit of the demo. And if there's any questions, we can maybe address those too, Warren.
Sure. So what I'm going to go through now is a bit of a demonstration of the Director ID features in CAS 360. So I'll talk a little bit about our focus before we get into the features. So the first thing that we wanted to do was help you as the registered agent manage the Director IDs for your clients. Knowing what we now know, that the agent is not able to complete the registration for the directors, we wanted to give you at least a tool or a set of features to help you manage these IDs. We wanted to allow you to notify all of your company directors about the Director ID requirements. Okay, so to allow you to notify, get the information out. One point that I'm going to make here is that the ABRS is not emailing all company directors or not sending a letter to all company directors. Okay, they have not done that yet. They might do it next year, but it is not something that they are actively sending out. We wanted to give you some features to track who has and who has not got their Director ID. We wanted to allow you to remind directors of their upcoming deadlines, especially those that only have less than 28 days. We wanted to position you as a registered agent to deliver a great experience to your clients. Okay, and we wanted to give all of this functionality to you today. We wanted to give it to you in your hands when Director ID went live, not something we're promising 6 months down the track. So let's have a bit of a look at what you can do in CAS 360. So I have transitioned my screen. Just give me 2 seconds. Hopefully you can see CAS 360 up on your screen, Daniel. Yep. Okay, cool. So for those that haven't seen CAS 360 before, this is essentially your home screen and your company screen. Now, what we have done for Director IDs, we've built a Director ID alert and a series of Director ID filters. So the Director ID is this first alert, or this last alert, sorry, that you'll see on the left-hand side. So it's a new alert and it will show you information relating to the Director IDs of each company. Okay, what I'll do is I'll show you how the alerts work and how they allow you to manage that Director ID process. So if I click on the Director ID alert, you'll notice that I click on that and I've got my 4 options that appear down below. So the first thing I have here is my required in 28 days. Any company that has a director appointed to them after the 1st of November, straight away their alert will go red. And that will indicate to you that there is a director, not all directors, but a director that has a 28-day deadline. So straight away that alert will light up red. For all of the directors, essentially, that are currently in place or were in place on the 31st of October, they'll fall into this required by November 2022 alert. So you'll notice that all of my companies have that particular alert. And this is to indicate to you all the companies that have, I suppose, a little bit longer as part of that deadline. I then have a maroon overdue alert, and this will show me all of the Director IDs that are effectively overdue. So over that 28-day period, and maybe subject to some of those vicious fines. And then we have the completed section, which hopefully by November next year, all of your companies appear in this completed section. So instead of busting out your spreadsheet and putting together an amazing spreadsheet, in CAS 360, what we have done is we've automated it all for you. You have your alerts on the left-hand side where you can use those filters, and you can basically work out how many companies have and haven't and how much work you need to do. Obviously, in my scenario, I've got a bit of work to do. So let me show you how CAS 360 will help you manage and communicate the Director ID to your requirements.
So just as Warren goes into this, like what we've really done is we've worked backwards from the problem that you're going to be encountered with, and worked out a really strong workflow and process to ensure that you can best address the issue at hand. So as Warren said before, and like I was talking to someone else just prior to this meeting, they said, the whole concept of eliminating a spreadsheet to manage all this is actually very accurate, because what we've done is that we've designed a great workflow and really visual interactive user interface for you to be able to stay on top of where your directors are at and then manage that whole communication and exchange of information process. Really, really important. And it's a huge, huge time saver.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. So what I'll show you now is how that all works. So I've got my CAS 360 training company here. I put my mouse over the Director ID alert, and the system tells me that this company has 2 directors that do not have a Director ID. So I can click on Go to Director IDs, and up comes my screen. Now, what you'll see here is this company actually has 4 directors. So CAS 360 has gone and fetched the director information and presented that to you. Now, Andy and Warren have been good citizens, and they've gone and got their Director ID, and you've been able to put that into the system. And you can see that because they've got the Director ID provided tick. So that Director ID is now saved against that particular contact's record. One of the best advantages of using CAS 360 for this is you have a complete database of directors and all of their instances of their directorships. So for Andy, I can see Andy's a director in 4 companies. Warren's a director in 14 companies. When I added the Director ID, I didn't have to go in one by one. I just added the Director ID once, and it automatically applied to all of the companies that that particular person was a director of. So we're eliminating a lot of steps there. But we've still got 2 directors here that need to be emailed about their Director ID. I can see that Jess here is a director of 3 other companies. Obviously, Lisa is not a director of any other companies. You can see that I've got Jess's email in, and I've got Andy's email in. Now, if I needed more information about Jess, I could put my mouse over the I here and get a bit more detail about her. I've also got the system telling me when Jess's due date is, as well as Lisa's due date. So the system here is calculating when that due date is so that you know exactly when you need to get this Director ID requirement completed. And then once you've had a look at all the information and seen what you need to do, you simply click Send Now, and you're able to click Send. Up comes your email template. CAS 360 has pre-filled an email template for you with all of the information that you need to know. Where that director is involved in multiple companies, we will actually list all of the companies they are a director of in the email body. So you don't need to key that in at all. We've got links to the ABRS website. We've got a bit of information about how to get the Director ID, introducing what MyGovID is, go through the process of how to get that Director ID. And also, once I have my Director ID, what should I do? And that is obviously return the Director ID number to me as the registered agent. So I've got an email there. Now that email is a CAS 360 default email. You can customize it. You can change it to however you want. Okay, so you've got a heap of functionality and features there. I simply click Send. And now that person or those directors have been notified about that requirement. So CAS 360 gives you the alert. It shows you who hasn't and has got a Director ID. At the click of a button, you can click Send. Up will come an email, and that email will go out to that particular director or set of directors, and then you wait for the Director IDs to come in. So we've built this workflow so you're able to track and manage, but also deliver that information out to the directors.
The other good thing too about this too is that all the templates and all the instructions, we have put all those together for you. But the nice thing is also that if you want to add or update any of the text or the correspondence, you can easily do that also. So we've created a great set of instructions. We know that they work because the feedback we've had has been outstanding. However, if you want to go through and make any changes to these templates, it's just a matter of changing the template, and the changes will then apply to the templates you send out to your clients.
So just some insights. In CAS 360, we've already got 15,000 director IDs in the system. We've actually sent over 40,000 emails to directors, which is 40,000 more than the ABRS. So you can change, obviously, the email template, which Daniel was referring to here. So this is obviously our baseline template, but you can change it however you want. Now, when it comes to sending a reminder, it works in a very similar way. I simply click on the company, click go to Director ID, and here for Rod, for example, I can click on send reminder. And here I've got my Director ID reminder email. So it's very similar, okay, but you are able to obviously send a reminder. The other feature that I'm sure everyone will love, because it was the one that everyone was yelling out for when we did the initial webinar, and we're happy to release it, is we do give you a Director ID report. So this is a Director ID report. It comes out in a spreadsheet, okay? A beautiful spreadsheet with every bit of detail that you would need to know about all of your directors, okay? So you do have the ability to keep track in a spreadsheet if you like. We've got that as well, but obviously the features in CAS 360 will allow you to manage that. So essentially that is the CAS 360 Director ID feature set. Now, a lot of questions will come through, and I can see them coming through around what do we do with the Director ID? So the first thing that I say to you all is, once you've sent the email out, as the email will say, request that the company directors, your clients, send that Director ID back to you. That will help you in the future, because what is going to happen is there's going to be a great linking process where all of the Director IDs need to be linked to the companies that those directors are involved in. Now you might think, hang on, doesn't that happen automatically? Unfortunately, it doesn't. Step one of the Director ID is for the directors to identify themselves. Now they have identified themselves with the ABRS as company directors. But the ABRS, because it doesn't have its new system yet, still doesn't know which directors are attached to those companies, because that's still in the old ASIC system. So what's going to happen in the future is we're going to need to go through that process of linking. Now, effectively, we'll build all of this functionality in CAS 360, and I'm quite hopeful that the linking will either be one click or an automatic process. But if we've got the Director ID in CAS 360, that linking is going to be really, really simple. So hopefully, all of your company directors will send their Director IDs back. That's why we've built the alert, so that you've got the way of tracking that. And hopefully in 12 months' time, all of your Director ID alerts are green. If there are any questions, I'm happy to go through. So there's a question here, is there a way to bulk update Director ID details into CAS 360? Certainly there's a back-end way that we can do that via a spreadsheet. If, say, for example, you had 100 Director IDs that you had already got and you wanted to have a bulk upload, we could certainly do that for you. The other way that you can put a Director ID is obviously through the contact screen. So if you go to the contact screen and you search for Warren, for example, let me select the right one, hopefully. You'll notice here we've got an ID field called Australian Director ID. Okay, so that is stored against that particular contact. That is actually automatically added when you add the Director ID through the alert on the company screen. You can, of course, go into the contact screen and manually add it as well. So you've got the ability to store that. But if you needed, Ethan, if you did need us to upload 300, 500, 1,000 Director IDs, obviously we won't make you key all that in. We'll be able to import it for you.
Warren, just a couple of, like a real quick question. I really like this one from Anna Perillo, and I think that it would be something that many of our users are confronted with. we have a number of contacts that have doubled, i.e. contact with middle name, one without a middle name, two different places of birth. They've added the director ID to both. What do we do? And look, one of the things that I think this whole director ID will do here, Warren, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it will force a cleanup of your database.
Yeah, it's exactly right, Daniel. And it's exactly why the director ID is timed when it is. Absolutely, the director ID's timing has been met with a little bit of confusion. But really the plan is to identify all the directors so that when we move over to the new system, it will have correct director information. There won't be any, they won't allow any, Donald Ducks or Homer Simpsons. So to get to Anna's question, where you have the same person, whether they have a middle name or no middle name, whether they are born in one suburb and born in a different suburb, if they are the same person, put the same director ID to their particular contact record. Okay. Now, there are always forms like an ASIC form 492 where you can correct the information on the ASIC register. However, you don't have to do that per se just yet. What is going to happen is that director ID number is going to become the source of truth. So instead of saying Warren Rendon at 500 Smith Street is a director of ABC and XYZ, they will simply use the ID number to identify these particular directors. Correct. And then what will happen is behind that ID number is one name, one address, one date of birth, one place of birth. And that will sit in the regulator systems, but it won't be public. So essentially all of those records that we've dealt with for 30 years, where we've got one instance with no middle name, one instance with a middle name, one instance with a different suburb, one instance with a spelling mistake, all of that is going to be cleaned up by the director ID. So hopefully, Anna, I've gone a long way around it, but essentially add the director ID to both or to any instances where you have and you know that it is the same person. And in the long run, it'll work itself out because the linking process will clean all of that up in 2023.
Warren, just a quick thing, and look, I'm sure that this will come up as part of the CAS Desktop users. If they are CAS Desktop users, should they do any merging and stuff prior to moving to CAS 360 and deal with it there, or do you think it just let it run its course and let the process fix itself up?
Yeah, so the merging is always a question of what is on the ASIC register.
Correct.
So if on the ASIC register you have a middle name and you don't have a middle name, so some instances have a middle name and some instances don't have a middle name, do not merge. Okay, do not merge. The correct course of action is actually to correct ASIC first and then to correct CAS Desktop or CAS 360. So hopefully that clarifies it. Only in the instance where ASIC is consistent and CAS 360 that's inconsistent, that's when you would merge. So yeah, if you're going to cause a compliance issue, sort of a comparison report failure, for example, by merging, it's best that you don't do it. However, as part of the migration from CAS Desktop to CAS 360, we do clean up some records. Okay, what we do is we clean up sort of exact duplicates. So if you have 10 records of Warren Rendon where the details are identical, the migration will actually clean that up for you.
And Warren, while it's nice that we're showing this on CAS 360 and, we can see the huge benefits on it, I can see that from the comments we're getting. I think we need to be very clear that we're not building this in CAS Desktop.
Yeah, so let me get to those slides and we'll talk a little bit about that. So I'll talk a little bit about what's next for the Director ID and CAS 360. So very shortly, I'm expecting as early as this week, ABRS letters will be provided to us to include in the annual review process and the new officer appointment and company registration process. Okay, and we will also be building some new features for Director ID requirements in 2022. And what we do is if you've got some Director ID feedback, please send that through to us. We are obviously very aware that it's been in production for a month now. So we're always looking at ways to make it better. And now Daniel will get into a little bit of the future of CAS Desktop.
Yeah, and look, and we'll be very clear on this. The Direct ID features will not be supported in CAS Desktop. The reality is that to go through and build this whole thing again for the CAS Desktop system is just not something that we're going to do. Insofar as managing the Director ID process, it will be working out a system to manage it on your own. And I know I was talking to someone this morning. They've built some pretty good, from what I understand, spreadsheets, and they're managing it through that. But the functionality that you see in CAS 360 will not be included in CAS Desktop. So that's what we're saying there. But when it comes to the future of CAS Desktop, we want to just make clear a couple of things. First of all, and I'm jumping a few points here, but we're not going to announce an end of life. You will still be able to use CAS Desktop, and you'll still be able to do your lodgements until such a point that we are not able to do it anymore. And we haven't got a definite timeline on that, but we will definitely give you lots of notice prior to any end of life. You'll have plenty of notice. Warren, you might want to have a bit of a chat about what our next CAS Desktop update will include, and really what we're planning on doing with that update.
Yeah, so the next update for CAS Desktop is the 30 June ASIC price increase update. Okay, so we do run an ASIC price increase update every year. Effectively, that'll be the only feature that we will change in that update. We don't intend on adding any new features or building any new features as part of that update. I do say that this may be the final update. Now, we're not here to announce end of life, but it may be the final update. And the other thing is that at this stage, and I say at this stage because these dates can change, and this is why we can't really announce an end of life. But correct. At this stage, September 2023 is when the ASIC lodgement system will change completely over to the new system. Now, the new system will not be supported in CAS Desktop. Now, I know that sort of suggests that September 2023 will be the end of life, but Daniel, you mentioned at the start, I've been at BGL for 16 years. The one constant I know is that sometimes the government don't hit their timeline.
Yeah, look, our actions will be determined by what happens in this space, right? That's why we can't go out and say this will be the end of life. If this gets pushed out a little bit longer, then, I mean, we adjust accordingly. But at this point in time, it's looking like September 2023, but we're not announcing that at this point, because while we hope that the government and the bodies can get themselves to a point where they can roll out the new system, then we really can't comment further on that, because we actually want to see it released and active and put in our clients' hands. Yeah, so I guess our stance, Daniel, is that CAS Desktop will be supported while the Edge ASIC lodgement system is operational. And while that is happening, we will support it. And if that gets extended another 6 months or so, we will support it for then. But if the Edge lodgement system gets turned off, which effectively renders the product in a lot of ways not functional, because you can't get any ASIC annual reviews and you can't lodge any documents. Essentially, that's when the end of life would come. But we just don't know exactly when that's going to happen. But it's at least 2 years away from what we know. Yeah, it won't happen before September 23. Yeah. Just a couple of really important points for when it comes to the whole process of migration and moving across. And I think this is really important that you're aware of this. And what we've done is we've invested a lot of time, money, effort, and people into making sure that the process of migrating from desktop to CAS 360 is a seamless one. Now, for those of you who don't know, we've migrated some 1,200 BGL clients from desktop to CAS 360. We've also added almost the same number, or a little bit less than the same number, of new accounting firms to CAS 360. And I say this to say that we have lots of experience in helping with the migration. We have lots of experience in supporting you and getting your data across. The beauty about moving from CAS Desktop to CAS 360 is that as part of the migration process, which we will do for you, all your data will move across, your historical data, your documents, everything that you have on desktop, CAS Desktop, will move across to CAS 360. So there really is nothing that you need to do insofar as the handling and the migration of data. We'll also have a dedicated person to handle that whole process and project with you. We have lots of training and resources to make sure that you will be able to migrate across successfully. one of the beauties about moving across is that you'll find that a lot of the processes and the functionality of CAS 360 is not that too dissimilar to CAS Desktop. What is very different is the way that we manage the workflow, the delivery of the documents, the managing of the documents, the reporting, the whole workflow we have improved significantly. And really, when you land on the CAS 360 screen, that becomes your point of truth and your workflow that you will then use to manage your companies, the correspondence from ASIC, the ASIC debt, and also any lodgement statuses. So really, from CAS Desktop, and I've working with BGL for such a long time, I've seen the move from desktop to CAS 360, but I've also seen the incredible efficiencies that have been added from one product compared to the other. And
sorry, don't you go?
Go, Warren.
No, I was just going to say, what we're going to do now is just push up a poll for those that are interested in maybe having a demo of CAS 360 or having BGL reach out. So I'll just launch that, and Daniel, I'll let you continue.
Yeah, look, the main thing is you can take great confidence in the process and also the transitioning. And like I said, you'll see many of the processes and functionalities that are very similar. There will be some adjusting to do insofar as the way the workflow works. But once you get a grasp of it, and let's think about the process, for example, to get out an annual review. Traditionally, and we've seen this happen so many times, people would be using calendars to put in reminder dates. People would be using spreadsheets to track annual reviews and their payments. People would be using multiple systems built around CAS Desktop to manage one outcome. And we know that with the annual review, it would have taken a client somewhere between 1 to 1.5 hours to complete the whole process of generating it, mailing it, tracking it, following it up, etc. CAS 360, the whole process takes no more than about 15 minutes, and that includes digital signing. You'll spend more time following your clients up to get the work to you than you will doing the work. And really what you're focusing on with CAS 360 is outcomes and delivering great client experiences rather than spending your whole time trying to design and develop these workflows to really get you the same outcome which CAS 360 delivers to you from really one screen where you can get a real quick snapshot in one glance. When it comes to the process, I do encourage you to work with your account managers. They are very well versed in everything you need to know. They are contactable, they're accessible, they will hold your hand through the process, and they will ensure that they remain not only a strong point of contact, but that they will also ensure that you are able to get through the migration process and get to the other side with confidence and the support that you need. We delight ourselves in developing and delivering a great client experience, and I can assure you that the process is a great one. And I know for some of you on here, and I recognize one of the clients before, I think Anne Muldoon. I know you're on here before. I saw you ask a question. We went from DOS, and I think you would have seen this. We went from DOS to Windows, which wasn't a bad process. Now we've gone from Windows to CAS 360, and those that have been through it before will know that we know what we're doing, and that you can have great confidence that you'll be able to switch the flick the switch simply. And we're there to support you the whole way. And that's what we take a lot of pride in.
Yeah, I mean, I would just encourage everyone to have a bit of a look at, if you are on CAS Desktop, to have a look at CAS 360. I was the CAS Desktop product manager, built a lot of features in CAS Desktop, and really built it as best we could. CAS 360 is a completely different technology piece. We were able to effectively look at all of the applications that a person used to manage the work out that basically happened from CAS Desktop. So the processing of the annual review, the sending of the annual review, the editing of the templates, the digital signing, the calendar reminders, the spreadsheet reminders. And we actually built them all into CAS 360. That was what we did. That was our starting philosophy, was to make CAS 360 work without you having to open another application, without you having to open your spreadsheet or your calendar or Microsoft Word to do a cover letter or Outlook to send an email. And that's what CAS 360 does. It does it all in the app.
An important point here, and we'll conclude soon, but when we actually got down to the nitty gritty and we looked at what does it actually cost you to get certain outcomes and to deliver the corporate compliance function, many people look at, yes, the software cost, but what the price of the software. But what I encourage you with is to actually look at what it's actually costing you to maintain the function. And even though there is a price difference, and in some cases, significant price difference between CAS 360 and CAS Desktop, we know that the value and the efficiencies that it brings certainly drive down your costs significantly. And yes, price is important, but look at the costs, look at the inputs, and look at the value that we bring via the efficiencies that we drive, where we reduce processes by somewhere between 80 and 90%. And that's what we specialize in.
It's also, I guess, the other thing is that because it's cloud-based, it takes all the reliance off your own internal systems. So CAS Desktop, by its nature, required you to buy a server. That wasn't on the BGL invoice, but you needed to buy the server. You needed to maintain the whole infrastructure. You needed to run the updates yourself. You needed yourself or your IT team to manage and maintain that system. That's all covered by BGL now. And so all of those extra things that are not just workflow and efficiency processes, they're actually infrastructure services and IT services. Those costs drop to zero. You'll never have to buy the server anymore, or you'll never have to call your IT person to run the CAS Desktop update, because it's all handled by BGL. You're always on the latest version. You're always on the latest version. You've always got the best support. Yeah, a lot of those sort of, I suppose, problems that aren't, or those costs that are out of view, effectively go to zero.
And also to, in most cases, you won't have to send out a paper document again.
Yep.
Which is another beauty, but we can get into that another time, Warren. But look, just on behalf of BGL, we'd like to thank you on several fronts. One, for being just here today and for hearing us out, for being also just, very great and loyal, tremendous clients. And, we don't take for granted the belief that you've had in us. We don't take for granted the feedback that you've given to us over the years, and you can continue to give us. We're just really grateful for your support through such a long time. And look, yes, it's a big step, it's a big jump, but we also know that it's the right one. And so many firms are experiencing just not only a great experience from their end, but also a far better client experience that they're able to deliver, which we know makes for a very strong value proposition to the way that you position your firm and your people in front of your clients.
And Daniel, next week, at the same time, we're running another webinar on CAS Desktop to CAS 360. And next week we have Anne, who is joining us from the Field Group. And they were a CAS Desktop client. They were a very staunch CAS Desktop client and loved every feature and function in CAS Desktop. A few years ago, they moved to CAS 360, and Anne is going to go through her experience as part of that move, and how CAS 360 has changed their processes and made completing their corporate compliance work better and easier and more connected than ever before. So the same time next week, we have Anne joining us.
So yeah, if you'd like to join us, you'll get some correspondence about that. We'd love to have you there. Once again, thank you for joining us. If you need to speak to your account manager, they would love to hear from you. And if you have any questions, Warren and I will be around for the next 3 or 4 minutes to answer any Q&A that you may have. Thank you once again. We look forward to hearing from you and to being of service to you and your team going forward. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.